we're looking at a fascinating architectural blueprint for global survival today that says it's actually the only way we avoid destroying ourselves.
Which is quite the claim.
It really is. I mean, when you look at your newsfeed today, it's incredibly easy to feel like the world is just teetering on the edge. You see supply chain collapses, border crises, trillion-dollar deficits, existential security threats.
Is a massive, overwhelming weight for anyone to process.
Totally. So the big question for this deep dive is how do we keep the whole system from collapsing?
Well, that is the ultimate existential question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Jean-Paul Sartre actually framed the stakes perfectly back in 1961.
Oh, right.
Yeah, looking at the geopolitical landscape, Sartre stated that humanity fundamentally only has two choices. He said either we get along with each other or we perish together.
Get along or perish. I mean, there's no third option there.
Exactly. Pick your choice.
And that stark binary is really what's driving today's deep dive. We are unpacking a highly ambitious 2024 paper by Tennyson Samraj from Burman University.
Yes, which he presented at the 6th Canadian International Conference on Humanities and Social Sciences in Toronto.
Right, and the paper's titled Global Order, Past, Present, and Future. And for you listening right now, I just want to say this is far more than high-level academic theory.
Definitely. Samraj is proposing a massive paradigm shift in how the globe operates.
Yeah, he's laying out a blueprint to transition from an old world order that punishes bad behavior to a new system that actively incentivizes peace and prosperity.
Because the friction you feel at the grocery store with inflation or, the anxiety you feel reading about global conflicts, those are direct symptoms of the transition Samraj is talking about.
So to understand where we're going, we need to know where we've been, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Samraj lays out a historical timeline of how the global order has evolved, breaking it into three distinct eras.
Okay, let's start with the past.
In the past, the international order was rooted entirely in self-determination and the absolute sovereignty of the individual nation-state.
So, what happened inside a country's borders was strictly that country's business.
Right.
The classic Atlas view of the world, basically. Just heavy black lines separating completely independent domains.
Exactly. But then we arrive at the present. And today, the global order operates in this highly defensive posture. We are hyper-focused on survival, security, and sustainability.
It feels like we're constantly bracing for the next shock.
We are. But Samraj argues that if we actually want to reach the future without perishing, the international order has to be built fundamentally on peace and prosperity for all nations.
And he traces this ideal all the way back to the UN Charter, right? From June 1945.
He does, yeah.
But, we all know the UN Charter aimed for global peace. Looking at the last 80 years, though, it clearly hasn't created the utopian world Samraj is envisioning.
No, it certainly hasn't.
So why does Samraj think his specific blueprint will succeed where all these previous global efforts have struggled?
Well, he says the failure lies in the mechanism of enforcement. Historically, our global order has been rules-based.
Meaning it operates through commands and punitive sanctions.
Right. If a nation steps out of line, the global community tries to isolate its economy or punish its leaders. But that often just ends up starving its citizens,
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Samraj is proposing a principle-based international order instead. Instead of relying on fear and punishment, it relies on mutual benefit and incentives.
Okay, let me test an analogy here to make sure I'm getting this. It sounds like transitioning from a strict classroom where the teacher just hands out detentions, sanctions.
That's a good way to look at it.
Right, to more of a collaborative workspace, where people follow the rules because the incentives are directly aligned with their own success.
Exactly. You aren't dodging a penalty. You are chasing a shared reward.
But wait, if there are no sanctions and no global police force to hand out these detentions, what is the actual incentive for, say, a dictator to stop their bad behavior?
That's the big question.
Yeah, how does Samraj propose we actually enforce these principles?
Well, the enforcement mechanism is access to what Samraj calls the international state.
The international state.
Yeah, but to be clear, this isn't a single world government with a capital city and a global military. It is a stateless state, defined entirely by our modern interconnectedness.
Oh, I see. So the incentive is access to this interdependent web of technology, capital, and global supply chains.
Exactly. Without participating in this international state order, individual countries would find it nearly impossible to survive, let alone thrive.
And to maintain this web, Samraj argues the world doesn't need more punitive laws, right?
Right. He says it needs what he calls pronouncements. Just as religion provided commandments and the Americans drafted amendments for political rights.
An interconnected globe requires pronouncements to guide collective behavior.
You got it.
I love that term, pronouncements. It gives the concept a real architectural weight. And he actually outlines 12 specific tenets, right?
Yes, 12 pronouncements that all countries worldwide must adopt to ensure this system works.
Okay, let's explore the structural rules of this new world.
So the first 3 tenets establish the baseline for global movement and protection. Tenet 1 focuses on macroeconomic structure.
Okay.
It basically states that trade must be free and fair in an interdependent global economy, completely devoid of economic exploitation.
Got it. And then Tenet 2 moves from moving goods to moving people, right?
Right. It proposes that travel should be free and safe, without fear or restriction. Passports and visa regulations should exist exclusively for identification.
Just to regulate the logistics of travel.
Exactly. Never to prevent individuals from moving across borders.
Right. Which is a staggering departure from how sovereignty operates today. I mean, we will definitely need to address the logistics of open borders later.
Oh, definitely.
Because my immediate thought is just, how does a nation manage its infrastructure under those conditions? But let's look at Tenet 3 first.
Yeah, Tenet 3 drops from the macro level of trade and borders right down to the micro level of vulnerability.
It demands that children must be free from abuse, neglect, and carrying arms.
Crucially, it places the absolute responsibility for crimes against children squarely on adults.
Samraj sees no separation between a society's macroeconomic health and its ethical treatment of its most vulnerable.
None at all. But his definition of ethics leads to a major structural boundary in Tenets 4 and 5.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, here he mandates the strict separation of church and state and the absolute separation of moral and legal laws.
He insists the state cannot support any particular faith.
Right. And that laws exist solely to regulate behavior, never to legislate morality.
Okay, but hold on. This is where the blueprint creates a massive paradox for a lot of people. I have to push back here.
Go for it.
If something is clearly widely considered immoral, shouldn't it automatically be illegal? I mean, society generally writes laws based on its collective moral compass.
It's a very common assumption.
Right, so if we strip morality out of the legal code, don't we just invite chaos?
Well, Samraj draws a very sharp line regarding the role of government here. He clarifies that laws exist to punish illegal behavior, specifically acts that violate another person's rights.
Sure.
A state should never punish a citizen merely for an act deemed immoral by a segment of society unless that immoral act is also independently illegal.
Okay, to make this concrete for the listener, let's go back to the intro. Cheating on your spouse is widely condemned as deeply immoral.
Right.
But under Samraj's blueprint, making adultery a criminal offense that sends someone to prison is a catastrophic overreach of government power.
Exactly. That distinction is really the bedrock of his political philosophy. A state that blurs this line and punishes citizens purely for moral failings transforms into what he calls a fundamental state.
And he equates a fundamental state directly to a police state.
Yes. To participate in a healthy global order, a country must establish a secular state. As he points out, God may be definable and believable to the individual, but God is not identifiable in a court of law.
Wow. Okay, but taking morality out of the legal code requires a massive amount of trust in the structure of the government itself.
It does, which is why Tenets 6 and 7 tackle the mechanics of that structure.
Specifically, how to prevent a secular state from just becoming a secular dictatorship, right?
Exactly. And Samraj turns to a 1988 citation from the late U.S. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia to anchor this point.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Tenets 6 and 7 call for the absolute separation and independence of the 3 branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary.
I mean, we all know the basic civics of the 3 branches, but why does Samraj highlight this as a global necessity? Well, because...
Like, why is this specific Western democratic structure so vital to this interconnected international state?
Because Scalia argued, and Samraj agrees, that this separation isn't merely about efficient domestic politics. It is the ultimate, non-negotiable prerequisite for the protection of human rights globally.
Oh, I see.
If the executive branch can also write the laws, or if the legislative branch can adjudicate them, the structural protection against tyranny just dissolves.
Right. No branch can perform the duties of the others.
Exactly. Without this internal mechanism, a nation becomes unstable, making it a toxic participant in the international web.
Okay, so if political power is the first great destabilizer, economic power is undoubtedly the second.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to Tenet 8, This brings us to the money, calling for the strict separation of economics and government.
And to justify this, Samraj relies on the highly influential 1971 work of political philosopher John Rawls.
Rawls provides the philosophical engine here, right? Yes. Tenet 8 advocates for a system where equal liberty and equal opportunity are provided to all citizens, even if that system naturally results in economic inequality.
Now, I want to pause on that because guaranteeing equal opportunity rather than equal outcomes is a heavily debated concept.
It really is.
Samraj is acknowledging that if you give everyone the exact same starting line and the exact same freedoms, some individuals will inevitably amass more wealth.
Right.
So he seems to suggest that economic inequality is not inherently a symptom of a broken system, provided the liberty and opportunity were genuinely equal.
He is highlighting a historical trade-off here. Forcing absolute economic equality across a population almost always requires a government to systematically strip away personal liberties and consolidate immense power.
Which defeats the purpose of the blueprint.
Exactly. By separating economics from government as much as possible, you protect the liberty of the citizen, even if it yields unequal bank accounts.
Which naturally requires robust mechanisms to keep that government power in check.
Right, which leads us to Tenet 9. It demands a two-thirds majority to enact any constitutional changes.
Because Samraj argues that while a simple 51% majority rule is perfectly fine for election officials, using a razor-thin margin to rewrite foundational rights invites majority tyranny.
Yes. Just because a faction has one more vote than the opposition does not grant them the mandate to strip away the opposition's rights.
And Tenet 10 acts as the enforcement arm of that idea, right?
It does. It demands an absolute end to the weaponization of the state against political rivals.
Like jailing opposition leaders through a captured justice system.
Exactly. That destroys the trust required for the international state to function.
This all culminates in Tenet 11, which honestly provides my favorite, most memorable distillation of the citizen's role in this new world order.
It's a great one.
It simply states that the state exists for the individual and not the individual for the state.
And Samraj captures this with a brilliant quote. He says that what is important in a state is not only that anyone can become its president, but that everyone can live as free as a president.
Everyone can live as free as a president. That is the philosophical peak of his blueprint right there.
It really is. However, all of these careful structural balances, open trade, separated powers, individual liberty, they are entirely meaningless if the planet becomes uninhabitable.
Ah, right. Which brings us to the most urgent pronouncement, Tenet 12.
Yes. Samraj states it is an absolute necessity to dismantle and disband the global nuclear arsenal to avoid the mutual destruction of humanity.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back hard on this one.
I thought you might.
Tenets 1 through 11 rely on structural governance and market incentives. But Tenet 12 just feels like a utopian pipe dream.
Well,
I mean, we are dealing with sovereign nations operating in a state of high paranoia, asking global superpowers to voluntarily give up their ultimate geopolitical leverage or nuclear deterrent.
Right, it sounds impossible.
How does Samraj justify this as a realistic step, rather than just wishful thinking?
He argues it is less about wishful thinking and more about a prerequisite for the incentive-based system to even function.
What do you mean?
You cannot have a principle-based international order built on mutual trust and prosperity if every major participant is holding a planetary suicide switch behind their back.
Okay, that paints a vivid picture.
Right. The persistent threat of annihilation forces nations back into that defensive survivalist posture of the present era. It actively prevents the transition to the collaborative future Samraj envisions.
So the nuclear threat keeps us frozen in a state of fear. Okay, so we have the 12 pronouncements. The blueprint is laid out.
There it is.
And looking at it objectively, the logic is sound. Protect the vulnerable, ensure free trade, separate powers, and remove the threat of mutual destruction.
It makes sense on paper.
Which begs the obvious question. If the blueprint to avoid global collapse is so clearly defined, why isn't the world already doing it?
That's the million-dollar question. Implementing these pronouncements requires overcoming deeply embedded human psychology and historical precedent.
We get in our own way.
Exactly. Samraj outlines several massive roadblocks to peace, starting with a psychological barrier he calls alterity.
Alterity, that's the philosophical concept of the other, right?
Yes. Alterity is humanity's persistent unwillingness to accept honest differences, whether those differences are based on gender, race, culture, or intelligence.
So we observe people who are different, and instead of engaging with them, we just reduce them to objects.
Precisely. Samraj actually incorporates the work of the philosopher Martin Buber here.
Oh, Buber's concept of subject-to-subject relationships.
Right. Buber argued that a true subject-to-subject relationship is equal, free, and built on trust.
Let me try to clarify this for the listener with an analogy. Think of it like walking down a crowded city street when you're late for a meeting.
Okay.
You view everyone else on the sidewalk merely as obstacles in your way, right? They are objects you have to navigate around to achieve your goal.
You aren't thinking about their inner lives.
Exactly. You give no thought to their complex lives, their fears, or their families. But the moment you accidentally bump into one of them, stop, apologize, and look them in the eye, that obstacle suddenly transforms into a full human being.
They become a subject.
They become a subject.
And that transformation is exactly what Samraj says is missing on a macro scale. When we treat individuals as objects, they cease to possess humanity in our eyes.
And we do this globally all the time.
We do. We treat entire nations, entire demographics as objects, foreigners, aliens, threats.
So as long as nations interact with each other as objects to be manipulated rather than subjects to be understood, creating a collaborative international state is impossible.
Exactly. Rehumanizing the globe is a staggering psychological hurdle. And the second major challenge he identifies is equally entrenched.
Which is?
Religion, specifically the danger of a religious monopoly.
Okay, we need to be really careful here. We need to impartially present Samraj's specific warning because it deals with the mechanics of state capture. We aren't endorsing this, just explaining his paper.
Absolutely. Samraj acknowledges that religion is a profoundly important aspect of the human experience. However, he asserts a crucial boundary. No one possesses a monopoly over religious truth.
Consequently, no religion has the mandate to subjugate another.
Right. And he argues that having a peaceful majority within any religion is effectively meaningless if a belligerent minority manages to seize control of the government apparatus.
Because then they use it to create a fundamentalist state.
Exactly. It exposes a massive structural vulnerability. If a belligerent minority can enforce their specific religious doctrines on the entire population through the power of the state, the peaceful nature of the majority offers no protection to marginalized citizens.
Which perfectly reinforces his earlier pronouncement that state laws and religious laws must remain permanently severed.
Yes, the logic holds together tightly.
So, the psychological barrier of alterity and the structural danger of religious monopoly are profound. But the remaining challenges Samraj outlines touch on some of the most fiercely debated political minefields of our time.
They really do.
And again, for you listening, our mission is to explore Samraj's arguments as presented in his research. We are just analyzing how he connects them to his broader blueprint. We aren't taking a side.
Right, we're just unpacking the text. So challenge number 3 tackles immigration and the concept of borders.
Which we flagged earlier in Tenet 2.
Yes, Samraj examines the historical evolution of how humanity views territory. He notes that President Woodrow Wilson once championed the concept of open skies and open oceans.
The idea that the global commons belong to everyone.
Exactly. Samraj argues the natural progression of that idea is to advocate for open borders.
He is calling for a complete reimagining of the nation-state.
He is. He argues that, historically, nationalism was forged by a shared religion, a shared race, or shared language. But in a hyper-interconnected world, internationalism demands that diversity serve as a foundation for inclusion rather than a metric for exclusion.
Okay, but opening borders introduces massive logistical and financial strain on a nation's infrastructure, which leads directly into his fourth challenge, right? Austerity and the cost of government.
Yes, the two are deeply linked.
If populations are shifting freely, how does the government fund the necessary expansion of services? Samraj takes a remarkably rigid stance here.
He really does. He acknowledges the necessity of large governments to manage complex societies, but relies on a principle of basic fiscal math. Governments must live within the financial means approved by their people.
So no blank checks.
Right. He argues that if citizens are legally obligated to live debt-free, meaning, an individual cannot simply print currency when they overspend, then governments must be held to the exact same standard.
He explicitly targets deficit spending here. When a government continuously spends in excess of its revenue without any imposed limits, Samraj identifies this as a primary formula for social and political unrest.
Because the resulting inflation and economic instability inevitably erode the trust between the citizen and the state.
And that economic pressure often acts as the catalyst for the final challenges he identifies, right? The battle between tyranny and human rights.
Exactly. We discussed majority rule earlier. Samraj draws a stark contrast between majority rule, which is simply a mechanical process for selecting leaders, and majority tyranny.
Which is the weaponization of that power to restrict fundamental rights.
Yes. He references the 19th century Italian philosopher Mazzini, who believed the rights of the individual are secured by the strength of the collective.
Okay.
But Samraj sharply contrasts this with fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, who believed the state was supreme and the individual was expendable.
Samraj aligns firmly against the glorification of the state then.
Absolutely. He asserts that human rights are self-evident truths. They are inherent to the individual, not privileges gifted by the government.
Therefore, a government lacks the authority to deprive human beings of these rights. Its singular purpose is to uphold them.
Exactly. And he seamlessly connects this back to the immigration debate.
Oh, how so?
He points out that most global migration occurs precisely because governments either violate these inherent human rights or systematically fail to protect them.
Oh, wow. People abandon their homes when the state morphs from a protector into a threat.
Yes, the blueprint connects on every level.
Bringing this extensive analysis full circle, the grand synthesis of Samraj's work seems to be that globalization is no longer a future concept we can debate.
No, it is our current reality. We're already locked into the interdependent web.
Ignoring this interconnectedness guarantees disaster. Refusing to adapt from a rules-based system of punishment to a principle-based system of shared pronouncements means we are actively choosing to endure the supply chain crises, the political radicalization, and the looming specter of conflict.
We are choosing to perish instead of choosing to get along.
Which brings this entirely back to you, the learner. The next time you feel overwhelmed trying to decipher the daily news cycle, when you read chaotic headlines about migrant crises, debates over trillion-dollar government spending packages, or geopolitical standoffs threatening global energy supplies, you are watching the exact friction points Samraj has identified.
They're all simply the shift.
You are witnessing the painful, incredibly messy transition from an outdated world order that relied on sanctions and fear to the necessary growing pains of an interconnected international state.
It is Sartre's existential binary playing out in real time on your screen.
Get along or perish together.
Yeah.
But as we conclude this deep dive into Samraj's architectural blueprint for survival, I want to leave you with a final, highly personal question to ponder on your own. We have spent this time analyzing global systems, macroeconomic structures, and the responsibilities of the state. But if the absolute prerequisite for human survival is the creation of a stateless international state of pure, borderless interconnectedness, where does that leave your personal sense of identity? If the traditional markers of nationalism, borders, exclusive economies, punitive sovereignty must fade away to ensure global peace, what exactly will bind your local community together tomorrow? It is a question the blueprint leaves open and one we will all have to answer.